the Libertarian Party and Libertarian National Committee. Whitney Bilyeu serving as chair. As always, tonight, John Gapso is on the big board. And of course, I'm your host. It's a new year, but the purposes really are the same. We want to give the Libertarian Party and the entire libertarian world and community an opportunity to meet our wonderful down ballot candidates. We want to challenge these candidates to incorporate what we call lunch pail voter issues into their everyday conversation through the perspective of the Libertarian Statement of Principles and, of course, the Libertarian Party platform. And of equal importance, we want to create a bond, a recognition that the candidates around this country, whether in this case in the great state of New Mexico, California, Florida, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Delaware, these candidates have meaningful roles for all of us. And so we often say that people meeting these candidates for the first time may have never even met a libertarian before. So we're kicking off the new year. This is now the midterm election. We've been on them for, wow, John, I think we've been on for a year or two or three or four now. We've been through a couple of elections. Interestingly enough, the gentleman joining us tonight is someone who was literally the sign-off guest for this year's election night special. He was perhaps one of the latest libertarians in the nation to win his race. So he has a unique honor. He is, in fact, an elected libertarian who's won his candidacy against active opposition from an entrenched statist. Of course, joining us tonight is Andy Kennedy. He was elected. Well, I'm going to let him say the title because, quite honestly, it's a mouthful. Andy, it's great to talk to you again. How's life as an elected official? And just explain to us again, you've joined us a couple of times. You're joining us in another capacity tonight, but give us the title that you were elected to.
Yeah, I'm glad to be joining y'all tonight as the Central Valley Soil and Water Conservation Board Supervisor number 3 elect, because I haven't been sworn in yet. But
really, so when do you assume power? When do you actually take over? When do you grab the reins of government? Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. When
I'll be sworn in the last Tuesday of this month.
Excellent. And at that point in time, the coup begins. You're signaling the missiles to go off. But as much as we joke, and as much as the title is a mouthful, when you were on during the election season, we talked about the central importance of your job in a community, and well, we'll call it the greater New Mexico, West Texas operating environment, the community, what goes on. Talk to us about what your job actually entails.
So this board's job is both oversight of waterways, which, being in a desert, those are few and far in between. But this board also oversees grants issued by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And one of the things that I was able to capitalize on and really run on is that there was a lot of cronyism happening, courtesy of my opponent for this board with those grants. Basically, he was just giving them to his buddies, and he wasn't issuing or allowing any grants to go out to anybody else. And the thing is with these grants is the USDA just dumps a bunch of money onto these boards, and they have to do something with them. So, preferably, if left completely up to me, I would just say the USDA shouldn't take any federal money and the federal government shouldn't tax anybody. But if this money is going to be taken and it's going to be redistributed, I guess you could say, then it should be going to people who could put better use of it forward rather than just somebody's friends.
What type of money are we talking about, roughly?
It depends grant to grant. I mean, you can be looking at a couple $1,000s up to tens of thousands of dollars pretty quick.
And what's supposed to be the intent of this money?
So the intent of this money is either soil or water enhancements on a property, whether that is erosion control, a water well rework over, introducing a more stable soil mixture, of your nitrogen, potash mixture, etc. Mm-hmm. It can be a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different things that people can apply for these grants for. And, all they basically have to do is say, this is what I'm wanting to do on this property. This is why I think I qualify for a USDA grant for it. And then it goes before the board and they hash it out on whether this is a worthwhile endeavor to give this person a grant for this means.
Now, as someone who lives in the statist Northeast, where government is king and we look to government for daily sustenance, mental, philosophical, financial, as a region of the nation that would declare itself as dominant, but at the same time literally lives at the teat of government. Try and characterize for folks like us just how important water is into an agricultural community like southeastern New Mexico, like greater West Texas. Why is this literally a life force in a day-to-day battle?
Right. I get where you're coming from there. As far as water use in agriculture, I mean, anybody who has grown any kind of plant or, even has had a dog, everybody knows how essential water is to both plants and animals. If we don't have water, then we can't raise them. And making sure that we have sustainable use of the water resources out here is very important, because in my area, we receive on average about 11 to 13 inches of rainfall every single year.
Wow.
So what water we have, we definitely need to make sure that we keep around.
And so it is a hot, and we're, again, referring to almost obsessing with my role as someone from the Northeast, we have visions of cowboy rancher movies where there were shootouts over a lake. At least on a litigious level, and at least on a philosophical level, we aren't that far removed in a sense, particularly given some of the climate change that's going on in the nation, are we?
I mean, I wouldn't put it necessarily that we're at that point myself, but I mean, there definitely are a lot of concerns, especially because we are in part of the Ogallala Aquifer, which serves most of the greater Great Plains area in general. And the Ogallala, it has been depleting quite a bit over the past 50 or 60 years. I believe it's at about 40 or 45% of what it used to be. So, I mean, we definitely need to be more conscious of what we're doing as far as how we're using water and our future. Because, I mean, if we run out of water out here, we're going to be between a rock and a hard spot, because there's not a whole lot else we can do out here with this land aside from graze cattle and run a few crops down by the river.
Right. Tonight you join us, though, however, in another capacity. Tonight you join us, and I'll let you explain. In a sense, you're making your campaign announcement, as it were, to the larger libertarian world. You're about to begin office, but you're not sitting tight, are you? You've got other designs for later on this year. Why don't you tell us about them?
You're absolutely right. I'm not just sitting on my heels and saying, well, I won one office and I'm content with that. And later this year, I'm going to be running for New Mexico State House in District 66, which, for anybody unfamiliar with the district maps, is in southeast New Mexico. It comprises part of Artesia, New Mexico, part of Roswell, New Mexico, and then a lot of outlying villages such as Riverside, Loco Hills, Tatum, and a few others.
Now, we can't let the Roswell bit go. Tell us about your affinity for Roswell, if you will. Tell us about your connection to Roswell. And is it really as interesting as we think?
It is pretty cool to go to Roswell and see all the different cultural things as far as the entire alien thing goes. I mean, whether that happened or not, I'm not here to say anything about, but it is really neat to go see all of the different buildings and murals and museums and everything that they have dedicated to it. I mean, coming from where I live, if you're driving into Roswell, they've got a big wooden cutout of what looks like a UFO crashed in a cornfield, and there's a family out there giving them a jump start off their battery in like a 1960s style car, and the mother of the family is giving them a hot apple pie. I mean, it's pretty neat just to see. I mean, if people are in the area, if you want to stop by and see a bunch of it, it's pretty cool to see.
So is that an invitation for libertarians around the country, if they're visiting Roswell, in fact, that the welcome mat is out at the Kennedy household?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to make it, it's about a 80 or so mile jaunt from my house to Roswell. But if anybody's out here, if they want to drop by, I'm more than willing to throw out the welcome mat for them. That's for sure.
Excellent. So the talk to us about the New Mexico legislature, how it's structured, and as always, since almost just, I guess really within a short period after we started the show, the Rona, if you will, the COVID remains, absolute and it being top of the charts. But what are some of the issues and how is the New Mexico legislature is facing right now?
So as far as the structure of the New Mexico legislature, it's structured fairly similarly to the U.S. Congress. You have a lower house and an upper house, which is, lower house is state house, upper is state senate. Your lower house candidates are usually limited to around about 25,000 constituents, and your state senators are limited to around about 40,000 constituents. Now, that's not a hardline number by any means, but that's what they try to get in each district. As far as COVID issues go, that is one of my main things of my platform is I want to reduce the governor's emergency powers because the governor has off and on been operating on emergency powers for the past almost 2 years now. And that needs to be put to a stop. And one of my things I'd like to introduce into the legislature if I'm elected is a bill that would limit the governor's emergency powers to only be in effect for a week. And then after that, it would require state legislature to take action, whether to continue these actions or not. And unfortunately, a lot of the GOP in this state has been very supportive of the lockdowns and the unnecessary mandates that have proven themselves wrong time and time again, that they don't do anything. They're ineffective. I mean, we had a state legislator down here in my part of the state in December of 2020 was cheering on when multiple grocery stores were forced to close down by the state government. Mm-hmm. And when you have state legislators cheering on people's access to food being cut off, that is absolutely unacceptable.
Like most states, there's very much a culture, what I call a culture of capital. And what I mean by that is that the capital city really stands supreme, and so much of the wealth, so much of the political power, so much of the central planning is really like a halo effect off of that. Now, you've got a handful of significant cities in New Mexico, Albuquerque and Santa Fe, of course. What are those major cities? Are they the center of power? And is the rest of the state, in a sense, forced to, pay obeisance to those cities?
Essentially, what you have out here is you have a very rural state that is dominated by urban politics. And a prime example of this is how many state house districts are in Albuquerque itself. You have some state house districts that I guarantee you, if I was running for those districts, I could canvass, as in walk door to door and knock on everybody's door in a couple of days. I mean, we're talking maybe 10, 15 city blocks. And what my opinion is, we have 33 counties here in New Mexico. And what we should have is we should have 2 state house representatives for every county, and we should have a state senator for every county. And then you don't have a situation like we have right now, where basically one metropolitan area calls the shots for an entire state. New Mexico is the 5th largest state by landmass, but we're one of the least populous states in the nation. So therefore, Albuquerque is able to just roll over everybody else and do whatever they want, even though they don't understand the issues that those of us in rural New Mexico face.
So on one hand, as I read the Albuquerque Journal today, there's a great deal of concern, and I'm sure it's very legitimate, about urban drug use and the explosion of fentanyl on the streets of cities like Albuquerque. And I don't argue with the notion that great attention needs to be paid to that. But at the same time, is that reflective of what's happening in what you'll call rural New Mexico and the type of issues that are facing rural New Mexico?
No, not really. I mean, we're not facing a major drug issue by any means in rural New Mexico. But, going back to the entire issue that Albuquerque is facing with that drug issue, at least in their own terms, prohibition does not work. It never has, it never will. We watched it fail with alcohol. We've been watching it fail on drugs since the Nixon administration. The only way to fix this problem is to get rid of the prohibition, get the cartels off of our streets, because if you do not create a black market system, the cartels will not exist. They will not be putting our children and our families in danger. Prohibition puts all of us in danger. If there is no victim, there is no crime.
Excellent. What is the state's response as literally the front line in terms of immigration issues with Mexico? What is the state's overall response to immigration been throughout the last 2 or 3 federal administrations?
The New Mexico state legislature really hasn't engaged in a lot of cooperation with the federal agencies on immigration. And honestly, I completely agree with that. As a state legislator, that's not our place and something that we should be doing. As far as, supporting any annexation of land for a border wall, I would oppose that, because that is eminent domain and that's theft. You're potentially putting a farmer or a rancher's livelihood at stake, my bad. And we should not support that under any means.
Excellent. As I've often discussed on this show, myself, at that time, the executive director of the Libertarian Party, Dan Fishman, and a gentleman by the name of Tom Mann, who's a fixture in Libertarian New Mexico politics, took the opportunity to visit Deming during the height of, at that point, what was considered the Trump refugee crisis. One of the things that was truly stunning to me, as someone who, again, lives in the Northeast, and another issue that we're completely divorced from the reality of, was just the day-to-day nature of the border, just how much business transacted over the border as if it was really just another. I think of it as the difference between Providence and Boston, and with the exception of the fact that there's a checkpoint there at some point. How much of the border economy stretched out over both sides of the border? In the case of Deming, where there was an agreement in place for children from Mexico to actually attend Deming, New Mexico, United States public schools. The utter normalcy of the border for people who actually live and work there, as opposed to the people who would like to inflict foreign policy, if you will, who would like to inflict these grand immigration schemes on, from afar. As someone who doesn't even, and myself, particularly believe in borders, there I said it, is that your attitude as well? I mean, just if left alone, the utter normalcy of cross-border transactions, of cross-border life, of cross-border culture?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, couple centuries really, or in this area, there wasn't a defined border, and the communities here and in Mexico, whether you're talking about during the New Spain era, or when Mexico controlled this, or even once the U.S. and Mexico were in joint control of this area, there was a very much of a feeling of normalcy that, it was just, the other side of a river, basically, or, the other side of essentially a drawn line in the sand. And these communities worked with each other, they traded with each other, and there's no big deal. And in all honesty, a lot of us around here have a lot more in common with somebody from right across the border in Mexico as we do for, say, somebody from Minnesota. So, this idea that people in far-flung places in our eyes, 2,500 miles away should be saying, oh, we need to build a wall between these communities and we can't allow them to interact and we can't allow trade between them and, everything else, it's kind of absurd.
What impressed me about Deming, and I love that city. I love New Mexico. I've only in my life had the opportunity a few times to spend real time there, was just how Mexican New Mexican culture is, even more so than, say, Texas or Arizona or other bordering states. Is that a fair statement?
I'd say it's a very fair statement. I mean, anywhere you go in New Mexico, you're going to see tons of, old Adobe style architecture. You're going to see tons of, Mexican food restaurants, and that's pretty much where everybody congregates. I mean, myself, I probably, New Mexico style Mexican food more than I eat anything else, in all honesty. So, I mean, it is a very big part of the culture out here. And to say that we should just be entirely cut off from the forebears of our culture, I guess you could say, by some bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Like that, that to me, that's kind of absurd. It's people, people who don't know this area are trying to make laws about it is essentially what's happening. Again, it's a rural state being dominated by urban politics, but just in this specific case, we're being dominated by Washington, D.C. rather than Albuquerque.
Interesting. It's amazing that when economies and cultures are allowed to seek their own level, to grow organically, to evolve naturally, how far improved the quality of life is for the people in those communities, as opposed to government attempting to constantly interfere, to structure, to mischaracterize, to create division, whether it be on an economic level, on a judicial level, on a criminal justice level, whether it be on a philosophical level. It's you've got this astonishing energy down there that is constantly being screwed with by government. How entrepreneurial do you find New Mexico to be? And what, as someone who would become part of the legislature, are there any improvements, mostly in the form of getting government out of people's way, but what would you seek to do to increase, if you will, the level of economic activity in a state that does suffer from a great deal of poverty?
Right. I do think that there is a very entrepreneurial spirit here in New Mexico amongst the populace. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things that the government does that hinders that. One of the biggest things is called a gross receipt tax. And what a gross receipt tax is, in simplest terms, is you can basically think of it as a sales tax, except it is not paid just at every point of sale to the end consumer. That tax is paid at every single level of production, whether it is company A producing a material that they sell to company B, and then company B sells it to the end consumer, or company A produces a product, or produces a material, then they turn it into a product, and then they sell it to a consumer. Every single step of that is taxed. And unfortunately, one of the biggest industries that hurts in our state and is causing people in this industry to flee is in healthcare. And right now, we all know how important healthcare workers are. And we have people right and left who are either retiring early from healthcare or they are leaving the state for another one because this gross receipt tax impacts their industry so badly.
Oh, so in a sense, it's almost like a value-added tax on top of the already.
Correct. It's essentially, it's another sales tax on top of the existing sales tax, and that gross receipt tax needs to go badly.
Wow. Is there any appetite for that in the New Mexico legislature?
As far as within the New Mexico legislature, that I cannot say. As far as within the constituents that I've interacted with and I've brought this issue up with, there is a lot of support for getting rid of this gross receipt tax because it would reduce the price of a lot of goods out here. And being that, especially in my area, we're in a desert and we're a long ways off of any interstate. So everything has to be trucked in here, and shipping costs in here are already pretty high. So we don't need unnecessary taxes already on top of our shipping costs that are making our goods that we need every day even more expensive. And then another thing that hampers our economy out here is the state income tax, in which that's something that I think needs to go. Granted, yes, it's not as high as a lot of states are. It's not as punitive as a lot of states are, but it still damages our economy severely, and it needs to go. Same as the property tax. Again, the property tax here is not as high as it is in some states, but it does impede business owners or potential business owners from starting up a new business or running their business and, putting food on the table for their families. Because at the end of the day, what you can look at a tax as is it's basically the government coming in and taking food off of your kid's plate.
So you've got property taxes, you've got sales taxes, you've got income taxes. I'm calling it, by and largely, an additional value-added tax. Holy shnikes.
Right, in which they're fairly low taxes compared to most taxes like that across the U.S., but when you compile them all up, it does add up to quite a bit. Now, we are fortunate that our tax burden is not as high as, say, Texas is. Texans always brag about they don't have a income tax, but their property taxes and their sales taxes will wipe you out real quick. So fortunately, we don't have a situation like that, but we do have a lot of taxes that need to go because our state legislature and our governor wastes tons of money on just asinine projects. Like they spent millions of dollars in Albuquerque a couple years ago painting murals on overpasses on the interstate. And you know what happened to them a few weeks later? They got graffitied over.
Wow. Education. Everywhere across the nation, parents have been brought face to face via what we all us boomers here call the CRT, the cathode ray tube, as a result of, I'll call it one of the great unintended, unforeseen, unanticipated consequences of COVID. You know, around the nation, parents, all of a sudden, parents who might have been too busy, under too much financial stress to go into school, school came to them. And in the form of distance learning. And in many cases, for the first time, they came face to face with their school's curriculum, the interference, if you will, of an attempt to mandate a social structure via the schools of America. What type of influences were seen in New Mexico? What type of feedback are parents providing? And how is the overall quality of public education in New Mexico?
So public education here in New Mexico is heavily dependent on the oil and gas industry for funding. And without that, the funds for it would definitely suffer. But, you know, New Mexico did go to I guess you could say a flexible learning or a online at-home learning system for a good year when COVID hit. And like you said, you know, a lot of parents did start seeing what their kids' curriculum was. And I think that a lot of people, you know, took issue with certain things. And I think the way to fix that is to introduce more school choice, you know, starting off with charter schools and then even allowing more access to private schools, you know, i.e. allowing private schools to set up. And if you repealed the property taxes and you repealed the income taxes that go to feed these monsters of the public education system, then more parents would be able to afford to send their kids to a private school or enroll them into a homeschool program, in which everybody should have that choice. You know, if you want to, you know, in this current system we have, if you want to send your kid to a public education system, that's fine. If you want to send them to a charter education school, you should be able to. Same with private school or homeschooling. And we need to make that more flexible for all parents to decide what is right for their kids.
Wow. If you were to sit at the table, the dinner table, and I don't know if in a state with so many cultures, you know, there are so many New Mexicos even within New Mexico. I don't know if this is possible, but what would you say is the most, outside of Corona, the biggest concern of the average New Mexican?
Well, it really depends on where you go. Because if you pick somebody from random from the northeastern part of the state or from the northwest or the southwest or the eastern part of the state, you're going to get a very different answer about what's the most important to them. I think in my area, you know, for the constituents that I'd be representing, one of our biggest issues is making sure that our oil field and our agriculture industries stay strong and protected. And part of that is there is the oil conservation district boards that they say that they are protecting the environment, but all they're really doing is trying to make oil production a lot harder on everybody involved. And we need to get them a lot less involved in our industry. I mean, perfect example is they will come out and they will shut wells down because a casing pipe is reading too much pressure on it, quote unquote, too much pressure in their words, and they will fine the operating company for it. What does that do? That takes food off of somebody's table who's running that well, you know. So as far as, you know, protecting our oil industry, you know, getting OCD less involved in our oil production, and also making sure that the state actually issues oil lease rights to more people on state land, or to more companies on state lands. That needs to happen. And then also we need to protect grazing rights for our ranchers out here, because that has come under threat recently from various different groups, most of them based out of Albuquerque or Santa Fe, who don't really understand what cattle grazing is or what it means for the local economies, nor what it means for the environment. Cattle grazing doesn't damage the environment. We used to have thousands upon thousands of buffalo roaming through here. You really think a couple cows are going to damage the grasslands?
Wow. First of all, you had me at OCD. Is that really the acronym for that oil conservation
Yes.
organization?
Yes. That is the actual government issued acronym for that, or it's the Oil Conservation Department, not Oil Conservation Districts. I misspoke earlier. But yes, that is the actual acronym for that department.
All right. So, well, it's fair to say that OCD has OCD?
Yes. They have it very bad.
Wow.
And they also do asinine things like, which this actually came up in the Soil Water Conservation Board interview, I believe, of the state legislature was wanting to allow OCD to go out and find a company. Let's say in the 1970s, company A had a spill of some sort of product related to the petroleum industry. So company A had it in the 1970s. They sell this lease to company B in the 80s. Company B sells it in the early 2000s to company C. Company C sells it to company D in the mid 2010s. Well, they were wanting to go in and allow OCD and other groups to find this company D for a spill that happened in the 70s. That they might not even know about that spill, but they wanted to allow them to find them anyways.
Right. A similar approach that in the Northeast, in the Midwest, it's often taken to Browns fields. And the problem is, and let me guess, this ultimately makes it almost impossible to sell or transfer land. It almost makes it impossible to sell or maintain value in industrial style businesses, and essentially completely ruptures the economic lifeline that those businesses afford the community, while at the same time not really affording any type of financial accountability to the original problem, because most of these companies have either ceased to exist, but at the same time rendering them uninsurable. Is that a fair synopsis?
It's pretty close. I mean, it doesn't make it impossible to sell land or to transfer oil leases, but it does add a lot of very unnecessary risk to the equation. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, if OCD was coming and saying, "Hey, you know, if you bought the property and there's an old spill on it, you need to clean it up." If that was the case, okay, I could see that as fairly reasonable. Mm-hmm. But when they're coming in here saying, "We're going to fine you for something that you didn't even know happened 50 years ago," that is way out of line.
Now let me guess. OCD is a quasi-governmental agency that was created, I'm just spitballing here, was created by a bunch of, air quotes, well-meaning activists who decided somebody had to do something. Is that, how close am I?
You're pretty spot on. It was pretty well created by a bunch of people who don't really know what goes on in the oil field and how all this works. And then they just took their opinions and made them legislation. And then they're trying to just enforce their opinions in the law, pretty much.
Wow, could we, Mr. Gapson, could we make a note of that statement? I'm going to use that. Can you run that by me again? They took their opinions and made them legislation. That I don't know if I've ever heard a better way of summing up the learned, well-educated, studied, sophisticated approach to solving our nation's problems. They took their opinions and they made them legislation. Oh man, holy cow! Wow, that pretty much nails it. And this raises an important point, because you live, you know, you and I talk a lot offline, and we joke about this sometimes. I tease you about it, but the West Texas, Eastern New Mexico lifestyle, which is a combination of work very often in a hybrid community of oil work, natural gas and energy work, combined with cattle and agriculture, and a healthy, respected, but a heavy involvement in terms of day-to-day life surrounding our natural resources, hunting, and occasionally fishing. But there's this incredible mix there that you embody, don't you?
Yeah, you're right. As you said, you know, I'm connected every day in the oil field to natural resources, to the agriculture industry, primarily through ranching. And also, as you said, you know, I'm a very avid sportsman. You know, I like hunting, I like fishing. I know that might not be everybody's cup of tea, but, you know, it is what it is. And part of a lot of what my campaign is, I want to protect all of those natural resources and make sure that they're there for future generations and that we can actually sustainably use them and not just say, oh, you're shut off, you can't use them anymore. And, we covered OCD earlier, and we covered grazing rights. And then another thing that's part of my campaign is when it comes to the Fish and Game Department out here. They are essentially a little autocracy who the head of the Fish and Game Department is appointed by the governor, and they are really not beholden to any public opinion. They do hold town halls occasionally, but a lot of times they just deviate and do whatever they want, again, making their opinion in the legislation. Mm-hmm. And what I'd like to do to try to fix this is most of the bigger towns out here, whether you're talking about Carlsbad, Roswell, and, just in our area alone, they have field offices where the game wardens work out of. And what I'd like to do is create essentially a citizens conservation board, similar to a soil and water conservation board or a school board, whatever you want to hash it out as, a board that has oversight of each of these field offices that these field offices have to answer to. And that, and a lot of what a lot of this would fix is problems like the Fish and Game Department will go out and they will survey an area, and they survey there's 1,300 mule deer bucks in this one particular hunting unit, and they will issue 1,300 buck tags for this unit. Now, granted, those buck tags, the chance of all of those buck tags being filled is very, very low, but it is a possibility. It could happen. And then what are you going to do? And the Fish and Game Department doesn't have to answer to anybody currently about that. But if there's a citizens board and they come propose, hey, we surveyed that there's 1,300 deer in this one unit. We want to issue 1,300 tags. Then the Citizens Conservation Board could say, no, you need to scale that back, issue 500 buck tags or 600 buck tags, and then issue, say 1,000 doe tags. And that's also another problem, is they don't issue mule deer doe tags. And so what ends up happening is you have a very bad ratio of you have more does than you have bucks by a long shot, and a lot of does end up don't having fawns every year. So if you had boards made up of people who were actual outdoors people, they could actually provide an on-the-ground insight into what's happening in these areas that the Fish and Game Department's, what the issues that the Fish and Game Department is causing. And the way that I think that we could vet to make sure somebody is an actual hunter or a fisher, or angler, I guess I should say, is, require people to have a hunting and or a fishing license for the 5 years prior to them running for this Citizens Conservation Board.
Wow. Covering a lot of turf here. But I can't spend an hour with someone from New Mexico without talking about, of course, the governorship of the great state of New Mexico. The current governor is a woman named by the name of Michelle, and forgive me because I'm sure I'll brutally mispronounce her middle name. Is it Lujan Grisham? Is that the
Michelle Lujan? Michelle Lujan Grisham, yes, sir.
All right, so we have to talk about Gary Johnson, at least for a minute. Now, Gary Johnson, for those who aren't familiar with the Gary Johnson story, attending university, he started a general contracting firm and an HVAC firm, which he then, over time, blew up into be a 1,000+ employer. That was actually, until the last couple of years, still operating as an independent business years after he'd sold it. And then it was folded into a larger corporation. Someone who came from an entrepreneurial background, someone who, as a Republican governor, had managed to, and at the time they called him Governor Veto, because he vetoed record numbers of legislation and left the state in pretty solid financial circumstances, despite, and I say this with respect, that being one of the poor states in the nation, simply because of its background as a largely, particularly in southern New Mexico, underdeveloped economically state, and largely based on, we'll call it just off the books lifestyle of ranching, and a lot of issues in terms of cross-border business development. A kind of mix of this spectacularly beautiful state with wonderful people who financially, had a number of challenges. Just leave it at that. We've now morphed into someone who is a lifelong, a scion, if you will, of a major New Mexican political family, is very much a product, if you will, of urban New Mexico, and has a long history of large, big government services. She is a creation of the state, from my read. How much influence does she have as opposed to Martinez or a Johnson or any one of a, and things started going down rapidly downhill from my perspective when Bill Richardson was elected governor of New Mexico. How far have we fallen in terms of big government, going from a really aggressive small government administration like Gary Johnson to the current administration?
I would say that New Mexico has definitely had somewhat of a fall from grace since Michelle Lujan Grisham got elected to the governorship. When she took office, there was actually a surplus in the New Mexico state coffers. Since she has taken office, New Mexico is in quite a bit of debt. The actual figures of either one I don't have right off the top of my head, but she has gone on a very big spending spree. And like I said earlier, it's usually a bunch of just ridiculous projects that don't really need to be done, like painting murals on overpasses. So you have that in the fiscal part of she's definitely done some damage to this great state. But as far as civil rights, she's also attempted to do quite a bit of damage as well. One of her first things that she tried to do, the first legislature after she got elected, was she tried to pass through red flag gun confiscation. And they did pass it through the state legislature, but fortunately all but I believe either 3 or 4 sheriffs in the 33 counties out here refused to enforce that law. She attempted to have pushed through a quote unquote safe storage act, which we all know that won't do anything. Putting your guns in a safe isn't going to do anything except make you more, vulnerable to a criminal if they break into your house and try to attack you. So she actively tried to endanger New Mexicans through that. In which, as far as gun rights, something that I'd push in the state legislature is protecting our constitutional carry that we have out here. We currently have constitutional carry for open carry. You have to have a license permit for concealed carry, in which I think that we should keep the framework in place for that concealed carry license, just so that if people go to other states, then they have a license they can carry. But I think that there should be no penalty for actually carrying a concealed firearm without that permit. Essentially remove the requirement for the permit to carry a concealed firearm within the state. And then another thing that I think that we should do is, within the framework of the Constitution itself actually says that the federal government cannot regulate intrastate commerce, meaning any economic activity that happens within the state. And where I think that we should go with that is, if a firearm is manufactured in New Mexico, it is sold at a New Mexico gun store, and it is bought by a New Mexican, and it stays within this state, the federal government should have no regulation over that firearm whatsoever. Doesn't matter if it's your bolt action hunting rifle or if it's a full auto or anything. They should not have any say in it. There should not have to be a 4473 form done on it. There should not have to be a NICS background check done on it, and you should not have to have a tax stamp if it is a suppressor or a full auto or a short-barreled shotgun or whatever.
Wow. I have to tell you, we're friends. We often talk about the things friends talk about. We don't spend a lot of time wonking out over when we talk about specific policies and specific laws and specific economic programs. Thank God, for the most part, we just talk about stuff friends talk about. On the other hand, what you've just done in the last 30 or 35 minutes is give a textbook example of the level of preparation candidates need to have with regard to running for local office. I would say it's near encyclopedic. Your ability to actually drill down into specifics and policy on a variety of issues is exactly what we need as libertarians running for office. The ability to simultaneously have a stand on an issue, but at the same time, both justify it and dignify it with all the minutia and the operating environments of those issues is exactly what we need. Wow. How, how much time do you put into preparation as a candidate? Because remember, this is a candidate show, and as much as we like to talk policy, part of the purpose of this show is to understand the type of campaigning individuals are taking, the type of preparation, the type of approach they're taking to campaigning. How much of this just comes from an active lifestyle in both being an entrepreneur, someone who's involved in a couple of different industries simultaneously, and a sportsman, and how much of this is you just sitting down and doing your homework?
It's a lot of combination of both. I mean, I form a lot of it off of, these are issues that I run into in my daily life, just trying to make my way in the world. Just a simple man trying to make his way in the world, basically. A lot of it comes from that, and then also sitting down, doing research, paying attention to what politics are going on, both at the local level and at the state level, and also even at the federal level. And just sitting down and really formulating what better policies could be implemented to actually help people's daily lives.
And again, and this is a compliment. You can do that, but also having taken the time to do the homework to understand the specifics, so that you can speak big government when you need to. You can speak to specifics about the issues when you need to. Is a critical part of preparing a candidacy, because lots of us can. What it really comes down to is that lots of folks can bitch and moan about stuff, but it's having answers, it's having solutions, and understanding the environment and the framework with which these problems are occurring that is critical to going to people, particularly, let's just say, the cynical, jaundiced voter of the 2020s, who has just about had it with the ready, shoot, aim approach of big government, where, and we point out the current occupant of the governor's mansion in New Mexico, if in fact there is a governor's mansion, who is clearly someone who is intent on just, we've got to do something, as opposed to, when it's important, do nothing. And if you're going to do something, understand the issues and the never ending, if you will, potential unanticipated side effects of doing something. Yikes. The current inhabitant of the seat that you're contesting now, is this someone who is running again, or is this quote unquote an open seat?
So the current office holder for my district is actually currently registered as an independent. He left the Republican Party. He separated with them over their abortion stance, because that was one of their big fights that they wanted to push through state legislature this session, or previous session, my bad. And he left the Republican Party because of that, and he said that he was not going to run for re-election. I have not heard specifically who the GOP is going to run for this vacant office. I don't know if the DNC is going to run somebody or not. A lot of times these state house districts in this area go completely unopposed to the GOP. So I may end up being their main opposition, just like I was for Soil and Water Conservation Board.
This is a primarily conservative part of the state, interestingly enough.
Yes, it's a very red part of the state. And honestly, I'd say it's probably one of the deepest red parts of the nation.
Wow. Again, not something we would expect. Again, the big media would have you believe that New Mexico is the bluest of blue, but as is the case in so many situations, the reality is much more complex. Talk about the physical makeup now. You said is Roswell, of course. I'm sorry, I get a kick out of that. Is in effect one of the big urban areas. How are you planning on voting? Is going door to door, that's not really much of an option, is it, in most cases?
Well, we will be going door to door. That's for sure. I mean, I'm not a paper ballot candidate. We're going to employ the same tactics that we did to win Soil and Water Conservation Board, just on a grander scale. We'll be going around door to door in the villages in the area. I mean, the part of Roswell that is in this new, because this is a new district after the redistricting, the part of Roswell that is in this district is not all that big. It'd be fairly easy for us to cover. Mm-hmm. There's just a little sliver of Artesia. So, I mean, a lot of our focus is going to be on going around to the little villages like the one that I live in this district, and just going house to house, door to door, just talking with people. It's like, hey, basically go, hey, I'm an elected libertarian already. I'm running for I'm running for state house. Here's what I'm about. Have door hangers, have handouts ready, just like we did for Soil and Water Conservation Board. and basically just, like I said, employ the same tactics, just on a larger scale.
Interesting. Okay, because again, standing headline here, it's clear that I don't have a good handle on the geography because it's a fascinating part of the country. You're not part of any one of the big cities that dot the greater Southwest. So I have this mental image of small villages spread out. Of course, this wild, crazy geography that's eastern New Mexico, West Texas. Is it like that, or is it?
That's what
I'm sorry. Go ahead, buddy.
the actual overall geography of most of the district is like that. It's wide open rolling hills and plains and just a few dotted villages and ranch houses here and there. But I think that with my background and in what I'm into and what I'm knowledgeable about, we can really connect to the voters out here and really try to shake things up.
Excellent. Let's go into my favorite part of the show, and of course that's shameless self-promotion. What kind of schedule, now that we're past the new year, we're past the holidays, really the campaign season really begins now. What have you got lined up? What are you going to do for fundraising, and where do you need help?
So the first thing that we're working on right now is getting our ballot access petitions done. And those we have to have done by the end of this month, which fortunately we have quite a bit of help coming from LPNM on getting all of that done. Now, once we get that done, then we'll have to reevaluate. Obviously, fundraising is always a big issue with any campaign. And if anybody's interested in helping my campaign with fundraising, just follow my Facebook page. We'll put we'll keep updates on that. And, any help that we need, even if people want to come down here and help volunteer for us, whether you're in New Mexico or not, you want to come volunteer, you want to do door knocking with us, we'd be happy to have you. So, any help that people want to give to the campaign, I'm not going to turn it down. That's for sure.
And who are the dominant media players? I know you mentioned that you've got some appearances lined up with a couple of the candidates in the area. In fact, you can feel free to give a shout out to some of your fellow candidates. I'm impressed with the level of candidacies that are taking place through. And tell me, do you have a formal affiliate in Eastern New Mexico, or are you really just an extension of the state? But just the political activity that's taking place as a result of the team that's growing up in your area is impressive. Give us a snapshot of all of that. The media, what other campaigns are happening. Give us all the info.
Yeah, I mean, the big media players are all out of Albuquerque. There's several TV stations up there, and then there's radio stations all over the place out here. I've actually got a radio interview on 105.1 out of Maljamar Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Well, 9 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. And then you have your local newspapers and whatnot. Obviously, I'm going to try to get in as many of them as I can and get what I'm about out there, and just let the voters know that, hey, you have another option aside from just the GOP, who has basically just let the DNC roll them over out here and not put up a fight against them. And I'll certainly fight for my fellow New Mexicans, that's for sure. And then going into affiliates, we do have a county affiliate here in Eddy County, which I'm the chair of, and I'm going to do a little bit of self-bragging here. We have a 100% candidate win rate. So.
Excellent. By the way, is that the Bee in the Breakfast Club that you're going to be appearing on?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. And I hope you'll share with us when that happens, because we'll put the word out that we're gonna blow up the internet as it affects Bee in the Breakfast Club as libertarians. They're going to get all of a sudden they're going to look at their nationwide viewing is going to explode as far as I'm concerned. All right, because I think we all need to hear you on Bee in the Breakfast Club. I know I can't wait. Yeah, I love local media. I love local newspapers. I love radio, and there is no better expression of the political will of a community than what you'll get through local newspapers and local radio. It's phenomenal. A little bit of reading and a little bit of listening, you'll get a better handle on the political culture in a community like that than anything else alive. It's absolutely the best. Who else is running for office? I know you got a couple folks lined up out there.
Yeah, we also have another gentleman running for state house here in Eddy County. His name's Keith Brian Boone. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to be on the show tonight. I was hoping he would be, but he'll be running in basically his district is most of Artesia, western Carlsbad, and part of Alamogordo. That's the mainstays of his district. Hopefully we can make some waves there. And then we've also got a gubernatorial candidate, Tim Walsh, who I was hoping he would be able to be on tonight, but he wasn't. And then we also have, last count that I had, we actually had 2 lieutenant governor candidates. And then we also have some appellate court candidates as well. And so I think we're putting together a pretty good ballot, and hopefully we'll get a lot more down ballot candidates. The last count that I had, we only had 3 people running for state house in the entire state, but hopefully that'll change here pretty quick, and we'll get a bunch more people on the ballot.
Excellent. I think we're going to be doing over the next month or two, intermittently, a deep dive into New Mexican politics. It's there's great things going on across the nation that have nothing to do with caucuses, have nothing to do with internal strife or disagreements or any of that stuff. At this show, we prefer to look outward to see what candidacies and affiliates like yours, 80 County, New Mexico, are doing to really change the political culture of this nation, to understand that the primacy of the individual and individual rights should still be sacrosanct. In fact, should be elevated, that the notion that personal freedoms exist beyond any attempt of government to derail them, that in fact, your individual freedoms are your birthright. And that spirit is alive and well in eastern New Mexico, in large part to your efforts into the organization, the great people that you're building up. So this is going to be a fun campaign year, and I think we're going to play a lot of close attention to what's happening into New Mexico politics in the coming year. And you and your team, you got a real team effort going there, play a large role in that. And I think you're going to bring a libertarian energy to New Mexico that hasn't been seen since the days of Gary Johnson. Listen, I mean, it's given Governor Johnson, although at the time he was a Republican, given the successes and the warm embrace he was given by the people of New Mexico, particularly in his reelection effort, I think is testament to the fact that liberty can be alive and well in New Mexico, despite what multi-generational statists who live off the teat of government would suggest. I think New Mexico is ready to return to a entrepreneurial, if you will, individually focused economy that celebrates culture, that celebrates community, but at the same time also celebrates the role of the individual in building up and supporting that community. So yes, full disclosure, you're a friend of mine, but you continue to impress. So listen, keep on keeping on. Give us just a quick rundown again of your sites, of where folks can reach out to you.
I mean, the primary outreach at this moment is my Facebook page, which I know you've put that link up quite a bit. We should have a website up and running here pretty quick. We're going to have to retune it from the last campaigns, but we'll have more going. And if people want to follow that Facebook page, like I said, we'll keep updating it as much as we can. Anytime we have anything new for people to follow.
And you're ready now to accept campaign donations, or is that a function of the website?
That'll be a function of the website, and that's what we're going to have to retune, because going from running for just local office where there's basically no regulation on campaign finances, going to running for state house, we're going to have to fine tune some stuff and make sure we have all of our ducks in a row before we start taking money. But that should be running pretty quick as soon as we get everything retuned.
And Mr. Kennedy, I think you and I can attest the importance of being ready to properly handle campaign finances. Is that not true?
Yes, sir. That's for sure. Because in 2020, there's actually 2 people who ran for state house positions as libertarians, although we didn't actually hear about them at LPNM. So I don't know how they were able to run as libertarians, but it is what it is. And they basically just decided to not do any campaign finance reporting at all. And they racked up a sizable amount of fines over both of them combined. I'm not going to say the numbers because I don't know if I'm supposed to or not, but it was not good. So I don't want to create a situation like that for myself. I want to make sure we have everything in order.
Right. And having everything in order like that is an important part of your approach to politics, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when you're dealing with anything with the government or the state, however you want to term it, you want to make sure that you're coming to the table with all of your stuff straight and make sure that you know what's going on, and basically make sure that they're not going to try to mess you over come in the long term and catch you slipping on something. So I don't want to create a situation like that for myself. I want to make sure that we have everything in order and that we're not going to mess something up.
Outstanding. Well, what can I say? Representative Kennedy, soon to be Representative Kennedy, we hope, understanding that the battle is now engaged, that it will be long, it will be tortured at times. There's a lot of work in front of you, in addition to the responsibilities that you already have taken on in terms of your current elected position. But it just strikes me that this is the start of something great in a part of the country that, I don't know, maybe folks unfairly wouldn't have considered a potential libertarian hotbed, but a libertarian hotbed it is. I predict that the greater Eddy County metropolitan area will soon join Burnsville, Minnesota, as being epicenters of, remember, we don't like the word govern, right? Being the epicenters of libertarian stewardship in day-to-day government in your community. Congratulations. And I look forward to both as a friend and both as a someone who is involved with LPTV, and just watching and joining in and supporting your efforts going forward. So congratulations, my friend.
Thank you, Pat.
Folks, you've been listening to Candidates Corner on LPTV, Libertarian Party Television, a production of the Libertarian Party and Libertarian National Committee. Whitney Bilyeu serving as chair. As always, John Gapso on the big board, bringing you the infotainment, the maps, the pictures, the stories, the websites, everything that we need to really present a full picture of what's happening as a candidacy. Folks, if you'd like to join us on LPTV, reach out to me. My name, my phone number, you'll see me. At this moment in time, I'm a member as an alternate to the Libertarian National Committee. So there's 100 different ways you can reach out to me. Pat.Ford at lp.org, I believe it is, 617-835-1899. Call me. We want to get your candidacies on board. We've got a couple of folks working on some new campaign commercials that we're going to hope to feature next week. But we've got a couple of nights of airtime here. We want to support your campaign. And at the same time, we want to take the great ideas that, well, an Andy Kennedy might have, or any one of a number of candidates from around the country, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Texas, New York, California, all running incredible candidates, Florida. We want to share them with the nation so that we can grow this movement. Folks, we all understand that just about everyone you meet is a libertarian at heart. It's just a question of having that conversation, as Larry Sharp is wont to say, planting that seed to develop what we believe ultimately will be a nation that will return to its roots as a nation that celebrates the freedom of the individual. Folks, we will see you Monday night. Have a great weekend. If you're in the Northeast, stay warm and stay safe. Good night.